Tonight, we're going to study the Torah portion, Vayera. This is a really interesting Torah portion. There's a lot of things that happen in Parasha Vayera. We have the three visitors that come and see Abraham. We have the foretelling of Sarah's giving birth to Isaac. We have Lot's issue with Sodom and Amorah. And we have the issue that, the sacrifice or the almost sacrifice of Isaac. Abram having to send away Hagar and Ishmael and not wanting to, but Elohim telling him to listen to her. So there's a whole lot of stuff in this Torah portion. But, like we've discussed in the past, we have to pay close attention to what verses say, and especially when they seem like they're just simple introductory verses that we kind of just skim over because we're looking forward to getting into the meat of the subject, so we just speed past the introductory verse. This Torah portion, we're going to look at the entire Torah portion simply with the first verse. And it's going to open our eyes to see a lot of things within this Torah portion. So let's talk to our Elohim, and then we'll take a look at this interesting verse. Master Yahweh, we thank you so much for your support. We thank you for your word. We ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts, so that we can hear and understand what your word has to tell us, and apply everything that we learn to our lives. We thank you for it all. In the name of Yahshua. Amen. So the first verse of the Torah portion is Bereshit 18, verse 1, says this: And Yahuwah appeared unto him by the terebims of Mamre, as he sat in the 10th door in the heat of the day. Alright, so we read it as a story, okay? So Yahweh appeared to him. He was sitting down in this tree orchard where his tent happened to be, and it was hot. So what does it mean? How can we apply this simple little introductory verse to our lives, and how can it give us insight into what the balance of this Torah portion means? So we're going to begin with the word that gives the name to the Torah portion. The word is Vayera, that means and appeared. This word finds its root in the word ra'ah, that means to see, but more specifically it means to perceive, to discern, to pay attention to, and to consider. So in its essence, this word for to appear means more of something along the lines as to think. So this is more than just to consider that something is manifested in front of Abram's eyes. We lose the meaning of this phrase. We lose the meaning of a lot of things that the Torah has to say to us when we take the name of Yahweh Elohim out. For example, in our English versions, it says, and the Lord appeared. So we have this idea of some guy named Lord materializing in front of Moses. The name Yahweh, and we've talked about it a number of times, means to exist. It means eternal. Its roots mean everything that there is, was, and will be, today, yesterday, and tomorrow. So what then was Abraham perceiving, discerning, paying attention to, and considering? What was he thinking about, in other words? So we could say that he was thinking about Yahweh, considering his own existence in eternity, in all things at all times. And we could get so philosophical and say, oh, that's what he was thinking. And yes, we'd be right that that was part of it. But we take this a little further. We're going to take a word that seems to be skipped over in our English versions, but it's a very important word. And the word that we miss here is the word elev. Elev, it can mean toward, but it means according to. According to. Okay? So this changes our idea into something that would read like this. Abraham thinking according to Yahweh in all things at all times. In other words, his perception and his discernment in all things and all times was in accordance to that of Yahweh. So a question would then arise to ask ourselves, how do I think? Is it from my point of view, or is it from Yahweh Elohim's point of view? So let's consider the first psalm for some insight. And it's also going to help us in our understanding of the balance of this verse. Then the first psalm says, happy is the man, happy is the person, because Elohim is no respecter of persons. This applies to men and women. It's irrelevant. Happy is the man that has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the way of sinners, nor sat at the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the Torah of Yahweh, and in his Torah does he meditate day and night. The Torah is what's written in the Hebrew. King Jimmy, all our English-based Bibles want to put the law. Torah doesn't mean law. This is a concept that developed well after Yahshua. Torah means instructions. And that's a very important thing. That it's the instruction of Elohim that we should meditate on day and night. And keep day and night in mind, because that's kind of a relevant thing. And he shall be like a tree planted by the streams of water, that brings forth its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does he shall prosper. Not so the wicked, but they are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For Yahweh regards the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. So, there's a lot of things in those verses to consider as we go on taking a look at this little introductory verse in Bereshit 18. So first let's consider from this psalm that this person meditates on Torah day and night. And that's an interesting thing, because the natural order of things according to Torah is from evening to morning. So why is this reversed here? Our brains have to become rewired where we seek the light first, so that we can then be aware of the darkness. Oftentimes the darkness hits us and it forces us to say, I need to figure this out, and try to find the light switch, and then find the light switch on our own terms, freaking out because we have this darkness in our midst. But if we seek the light first, then when the darkness comes, well, we already have the oil to keep the candle lit. We're not like the foolish maidens who forgot to put the oil in the lamps. So we understand that from this verse, it's wise to read Torah, study Torah, so that the light stays on even when the darkness comes. So, we don't become this way by simply depending on a 1 hour or 2 hour Sunday service or a Shabbat service once or even twice a week. It says meditates on it day and night. It's something that we do regularly. And we note in the parasha that Abraham was sitting around as he was contemplating. It says he was sitting at the door of his tent amongst the terebinths. So no difference than what we do in the car, or when we do in the line at the grocery store, or anytime we're just sitting. When we're idling, we can be doing something to bring us closer to Elohim. So our relationship with Yahweh Elohim is a constant thing, even when we are sleeping. So the question was posed to me the other day, well, what about watching television? What about listening to the radio? Those are distractions, and we have to have distractions. Now, that kind of contradicts everything I just said. The fact is, we spend so much time focused on it that we can lose focus. We have to take time to step away from it and reset our brains in something physical, because it's the physical side of us that loses focus. The spiritual side can stay in tune all day long, but the physical side loses focus. And the physical side is the side that needs the stimulation from something away from Torah. And that's a sad thing to say, but that's the truth. That's the way we are as human beings. Even I try to take Wednesday off from study. Doesn't always work out, but I give it a shot. So, our relationship with Yahweh is a constant thing, even when we are sleeping. Only in this way can we be like the tree planted by the streams of the waters, whose leaf does not wither. The difference between a green leaf and chaff is the water that's retained. If we keep this in mind as we move forward with our parsha verse, we continue with the phrase, by the terebinths of Mamre. The word for terebinths, be'elone, means a grape tree or a terebinth tree. In most English versions, it is translated as plain, which is a secondary, not necessarily a primary definition of this word. Mamre, going into our story, Mamre was an acquaintance of Abraham who owned this particular piece of territory that Abram was living in. This particular parcel of land was an orchard of heavy trees like an oak. Okay, that's what a terebinth tree is. It's like a large tree. It's like an oak tree. So when we read that in our King Jimmy or other versions that he was by the plains of Mamre, that doesn't make any sense. It takes away from the meaning again of where we're going with the verse. So this is where we get the idea of trees as opposed to the plain. Now, the root of Be'elone is Ayil. Does anybody recall Ayil being the root of another word? If not, we'll find out about it here in just a second. So, Ayil means ram, which represents redemption. This word also represents the doorpost and the lintel. So it alludes to the letter Het. So let's review the idea that we've developed thus far, kind of personalizing it a little bit, and then we're going to blend these concepts into it. We can say, we think according to Yahweh in all things and at all times. Our perception and discernment in all things and at all times is according to Yahweh. So if we first consider that Ayil alludes to redemption, it's interesting that Ayil is also the root of the word Elohim. Okay? That means mighty one, judge, and ruler. If we consider these definitions, then it gives us a broader definition of Elohim, that instead of God, which is a word that doesn't really, in fact it doesn't exist in Hebrew. The idea of a deity is a foreign concept in Hebrew. The word Elohim means a mighty one. And in the case of Elohim, it means our mighty judge, who has the authority as our king to bring us redemption or not. So this idea of God, a word that doesn't exist in Hebrew, it means a mighty judge with the authority to bring redemption adding this into our idea, we understand that we think according to Yahweh in all things and at all times. Our perception and discernment in all things and at all times is in accordance to Yahweh Elohim, our mighty judge, who has the authority to bring us redemption in all things and at all times. And this is an interesting thing, that Yahshua paid the price of the wage of sin. He paid the price by dying. And he paid that price in blood in order to restore a covenant. Blood was necessary for the covenant, and he represented both us as well as Elohim. But this is a very interesting concept that we start to formulate. Now, this, of course, is our choice, and in this we find the letter Het that gives us a choice. We've learned in the past that Het represents a wall. The Proto-Hebrew drawing of it is that of a wall, either the inside wall of a tent or the outside wall of a tent. Het is also the Hebrew word, or a Hebrew word for sin. There's a lot of Hebrew words for sin, but Het is one of them. And we first find Het as the root of a word in Bereshit 3:8, in the word Chabeh, that means hidden. Now we say that all Hebrew letters are composed of other Hebrew letters with the exception of Yod, the smallest letter that is complete within itself. The Het is composed of the Vav that represents you and I, humankind, yoked to the Zayin. The Zayin is the seventh letter. It means, Zayin is a word for weapon. The root of Zayin is Zan, that means nourishment. So the letter Zayin represents the protection and the nourishment that comes from Elohim. As the seventh letter, we see the seventh day, so we also find rest in this idea of Zayin. So in Het, the Vav is yoked to the Zayin. In other words, we are yoked to Elohim through his word, and we receive his protection, his nourishment, and his rest. That is the other side of Het, that we can choose to be hidden behind the wall of sin, or we can choose to yoke ourselves to Elohim through his word. Okay? Now, I've just gone through the rest of the first page. All right. So, we yoke ourselves to Elohim through his word, who is Yahshua. And this is another thing about Zayin. Zayin is called the crowned Vav. If we say that Yahshua is the King of Kings, the Master of Masters, that he is our King, and he was the Word made human, and he is our King, then he is the crowned Vav. So we bow before Elohim through Yahshua. We come to Elohim through Yahshua. And Yahshua said what? Nobody comes to the Father but through me. So we understand this. Now, but just as Ram Ayil was caught by the horns in the thorny bush to redeem Isaac, Yahshua took a crown of thorns upon his head and redeemed us through his death. Now, the word memre means strength or fatness. It means something that's full of vigor. Its root of origin means to rebel, to be filthy, to lift up the self, and to have doubt. So, in this we go back to our question. Is it from my point of view, or is it from Yahweh Elohim's point of view? Is my perception from my point of view, or is it from Elohim's point of view, based on this idea of memory? Are we strong and vigorous because we seek wisdom from the word of Yahweh Elohim and apply its instruction to our lives or situations, or do we depend on our own strength out of rebellion and doubt in order to lift us up out of our issues? How do I perceive, discern, and consider my own life and existence in the world around me? These are all questions that